Thank you very, very much.
You all do look a bit Tory, though, it has to be said.
Sorry?
Yeah.
You all look a bit Tory, it has to be Tory. Flashes of red here and yeah.
Blue rinse. Okay, do you? Okay.
Absolutely. Well, guys, it's great to have us all assembled to discuss a pertinent and interesting subject of education and the arts. I'm going to start just by asking, if we go around the circle clockwise, to you, if you could all introduce yourselves briefly, give a short bio and a description of what your involvement in the arts is.
Okay, so I'm Rebecca Blackman. I'm a senior manager at the Arts Council in the Midlands, and I have the overview of some of the children and young people's work that we do. And but I've also been a teacher of English and drama, and I've worked in theatre and education as well as an actor.
My name is Jonathan Harris. I'm recently made head of Birmingham School of Art. My background was mixed. I started off being an artist, went to art school myself back in the 70s, but then became an art historian, working on American art actually. But more recently I've been writing about globalization and contemporary art, particularly focusing on Asia actually, which is interesting because Birmingham, as we know, is a very diverse city now with a global population. So I'm excited to be in the city working in the art school with this new public to think about.
My name's Kit Showande. I'm an education consultant and my specialism is enrichment. So we connect schools with enrichment solutions, mostly in the Midlands, but we also have clients from Newcastle, London, Manchester, who want to work in the Midlands but they don't know the schools, and the schools likewise don't always know who's out there. So we're positioned to be compare the market, and it pays for us to know things. And again, randomly, we've actually got 3 interns from Birmingham School of Acting, showing them how to get theatre into education.
I'm Steve Ball. I'm Associate Director at the Birmingham Repertory Theatre, where I lead on learning, participation and community engagement. I began my career as a teacher, teaching in Essex and in Barcelona, and I've been in Birmingham for 30 years, working in theatre and education, working as a producer for BBC Education, Head of Arts for Birmingham City Council, and I've been at the Rep for 13 years.
I'm Helen Mansfield and I'm Education and Community Manager for Town Hall Symphony Hall. I started life as a history teacher, but many years ago, and then worked in museums, archives, historic environment for many years, and I've done a lot with dancing and music along the way, and my role here is about engagement, participation, learning, and really connecting with people to offer as many opportunities as we can in a meaningful way.
It's interesting, we've all got either hands-on experience in the education field or in arts as well, and I think you'll all be opinions about this next question. Arts education doesn't equip our young people with the skills necessary for life in the quote-unquote real world. We should prioritise business, knowledge and skills-based subjects in favour of the arts. What do you think? Anyone want to start on that?
Yeah. The real world. I mean, the real world is about being a whole person, and about equipping young people and adults and life and career changes to be a whole person. So I think the arts absolutely does equip people for that, because there's so much business involved in it. There's a lot of core skills. There's entrepreneurship, there's creativity, there's skills, manifest skills, but also about well-being, because it's about having a healthy mental health, making sure that you're a rounded person to cope with whatever is interesting in work life and at home life.
Yeah, you raised a really important point there about not having a purely materialistic way of viewing benefits and outcomes.
It's worth saying that we don't just respond to what the world is like, the real world, we actually create the real world ourselves. So the values and practices that we promote in the university can contribute really productively to changing the world and making it more the way we want it to be. So I agree, a narrow kind of focus on instrumental learning of skills is not enough, basically. There has to be more of a dynamic interaction with the world and a sense of how we want to push it in certain directions.
I agree with that, but I think also there is some evidence that arts education can actually have an impact on some of the attainment of young people. I mean, certainly there's a certain amount of evidence for that it can increase outcomes educationally, but even more so, there's quite a bit of evidence that shows that it equips people in the kind of the facility to learn, if you like, you know, in the terms of asking questions, thinking creatively, being imaginative, taking risks, being curious about the world. And I think that in itself impacts on young people's educational outcomes. And I think that certainly if you speak to a lot of businesses, you would find that they are looking for people who can communicate and have all those other kind of skills. And alongside that, I think it's really important to say the creative industries are a business. So then it's not like business is over here and the arts and creativity are over here. The creative industries themselves are a business. And in fact, one of the fastest growing parts of our economy, and not ignoring the fact that makes a massive contribution to things like cultural tourism. So if we ignore the arts, we do it at our peril, not only for the talent we lose, but also for the kind of economic benefits that brings us as a country.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, you might have an opinion on this, Kit or Steve, that it reinforces this educational snobbery that there are vocational things that maybe the unwashed should go and concentrate on, and the liberal arts education is something that, you know, public school or Oxbridge students should have, one in which moral philosophy and geometry and music and all of that is fine for them, but people who need to get proper jobs quickly, like go work in factories, shouldn't bother with that. That's the kind of subtle implications I hear in that question. And
yeah, I think going back to sort of to the question as I was reflecting on it, it was, for me, drawing attention to perhaps how others value what they perceive to be the arts. And there is like maybe a PR gap there where, from being a qualified teacher in design technology, I wasn't necessarily able to appreciate the nuances of philosophy, English literature and such. However, from practicing in education and actually seeing what goes on behind the scenes, seeing different organizations like the MAC, even in terms of drama, acting processes, shadowing people from Shakespeare, different types of Shakespeare performance companies, you start to learn that there are actually huge life skills. But I would argue that maybe even as practitioners, we don't encourage young people to stop and reflect and take in the fact that whatever you're doing now is classed as practice. Practice is what makes you good at whatever you want to do. And I think that sometimes we're very focused on, let's get that end show done, let's get that end show done, and then we don't stop and then say, oh, just so you know, it's the same thing for someone who's going to be a graphics designer. They've got to put the hours in, get good at something, and when you do become an independent practitioner, you've got to develop other skills. So you can put hours into your art, but you may need to understand other skills, which include accountancy, which include business management, PR. So that's the only thing that I took out of that question, that it's really just about a reflection and showing them whatever they're doing, there's a bigger application.
There's an interconnection as well, which is what you're saying. And we do have a very compartmentalized way of viewing things, art versus science, when, you know, if to be a good artist, you need to have a bit of science in there, or vice versa. Steve?
I work in theatre, so I'm very used to not working in the real world in terms of using drama and theatre to explore an agreed fiction in which we can all examine and make sense of the complex world in which we live. And that agreed fiction can provide us with a safe space in which to explore these issues, in order to reflect, in order to learn about ourselves and the world. But we are very much in the real world. I was working in Australia a few years ago, and the Australian equivalent of the CBI was saying that if there was only one subject they wanted students to learn at school, it would be drama. Because drama was about giving industry in Australia the skills that those employers wanted around creative people who can innovate, who are good team players, who can communicate with each other and can work to deadlines. And that's exactly what the arts and culture can provide for children and young people and adults. And it's exactly a direction that we're moving away from in terms of formal education in schools.
Fascinating. We'll move the discussion on. So in terms of arts education, what is the UK doing right and what are we doing wrong? Such a big, broad question.
It's a very big question. In terms of universities, the provision is very mixed. I mean, one of the problems is that there has been a decline in the number of students going to study visual art at university since the introduction of fees, basically, because a lot of the parents are looking at this amount of money over 3 years and saying, what are the concrete benefits of doing a degree in fine art, for instance? So I think the question of money, access to resources, loans, all the other costs of going to university are now making it extremely hard for people from less well-off backgrounds to get into university. And this is reflected to a degree in Birmingham. I think Birmingham School of Art is less reflective of the diversity of the people who live in the city and their income brackets and what their parents do for a living. And that's one of my jobs, is to try to find ways to improve the take-up from people who live in Birmingham, actually, and find ways of getting out there. So there is good practice, but I think universities are torn two ways, between an elite agenda about getting the best and making the best a little bit better, and a very different task, which is about taking people who don't come from privileged already backgrounds and putting the effort into making them a lot better than they were. So that's an important perspective from my point of view.
I remember doing a few workshops to technology students, you know, turning up with jazz instruments in a jazz band to a group of just D&T guys, and them quite quickly getting the idea that these skills are transferable, that this world view that these people are talking about will relate into my life, into my ambitions. And it doesn't mean I'm not a technologist, but actually the way I view my practice is enriched by the arts. Now I think we've gone back to siloed ways of viewing things. Go ahead.
I'd want to support the aspects that you were saying about things that start well and don't necessarily continue. I think there has always been an issue of longevity, and the difference between this is a great idea and it gets piloted, but there's not necessarily a phase 2 or a phase 3 kind of plan. So that's in terms of projects. I would also say, from working with well over a good 500 artists across music mostly, but visual arts and such like that, there's also an aspect of stamina within the individual. So I think that entrepreneurial zeal tends to wear off. So as soon as they qualified, I think everyone expects that they're gonna make it big really soon, and some don't understand that, you know, if you look at your Helen Mirrens and you know, Dame Judi Dench, this is a 50-year
decades of,
you know what I mean, like progress.
Yeah.
So I think part of what we might not be doing right is supporting the mental skill set to allow artists to have stamina and longevity. I also think part of the reason why there's a staccato effect is actually around things like mental health illness or other issues, because very often you'll find that, especially with things like, so my specialism is in social emotional behavioral difficulties. So that's behavioral psychology, just before I go any further. So what's very interesting is that the energy you need to sustain an enterprise is very long term and it's relentless. And anything that can cause a disruption to your emotional stability will always set you back. It's very hard to pick up where you left off. So once you have a crisis with bipolar or depression, it's always like going back. So that's also why we find that some artists will always hit a certain type of glass ceiling, because what you need to continue in the long term isn't always easy. It's not always supported. So I feel like they get going, they're really motivated, one disruption occurs, either in the industry or outside the industry.
Back to square one.
Yeah, and you know what it's like. If nobody hears from you for a month, they assume that you might have gone, and you then have to find new networks, start again, and meanwhile, in another year, your competitions come up, the next graduates come. So that's just something to be aware of, that maybe we need to support emotional stability and we need to support industrial stamina, I suppose.
Has anyone, just curiously, worked outside of the UK or worked, or you know, different cities, or with an overview of how well we as a country might be doing things versus others?
I think we're doing very well as a country. I think we can often get into a cycle of doom about how awful the government is, how awful funding cuts are, etc., without realising the wealth of resource that we've got, particularly here in Birmingham, but also across the UK. The engagement that arts organisations and large arts organisations have with schools and communities is something that doesn't often happen in other countries. The UK has led the world in terms of arts education, and that's something that we sometimes forget. There are challenges. I think there are challenges in terms of the fact that many of us are working in the same schools with inspirational head teachers, and there are huge cold spots across the city and the region that we aren't fully addressing. And I think there are challenges in terms of the lack of cultural diversity, in terms of the programmes that we're offering to schools and the artists that we're engaging with, so that they aren't currently fully reflecting the cultural diversity of the city and the region and the UK.
And I'd agree with that, because in terms of what the Arts Council funds, I work for the Arts Council, and you know, most of the national portfolio organisations that we fund in Birmingham, but across the country, have quite a developed offer for children and young people, and that's fantastic. And that offer is often extremely high quality, and I agree with Steve that other countries look to us and go, well, how are you doing that? You know, but what I would say is that when you delve down under that a little bit, what you find is that there are groups of children and young people who just don't have access to that. And they're not having access to that because maybe their families are not confident and used to engaging with arts and culture, or maybe they're in a school that doesn't engage with arts and culture. And so I think the challenge for us is, how do you reach those particular schools? And I think we are thinking about it a lot and doing things. So the Arts Council's just launched the Cultural Education Challenge, which is to try and address precisely that, to say, you guys are all doing really great things in your organisations, but hey, did you know you're all going to the same 10 schools all the time, for example? You know, how can we be more joined up and going, how do we reach all those other schools that are don't really know about this, or the kids aren't getting the opportunity to do that? And then I think so while that is really great, it's compounded a bit by the fact that in the education system, with the introduction of the baccalaureate, there is a danger that the arts will get squeezed out as schools get measured by those outcomes on those particular things. So I think that's a real challenge for us, and how we can advocate for the arts to be a measure, but also for us at the Arts Council, like we'll be having conversations with Ofsted going, well, maybe is there something to think about saying no school can be an outstanding school unless it has an outstanding cultural offer? There's absolutely value in science and all those things, but the arts and culture are as important, and they bring different things.
And what I'd want to really just support that, because it's very true what you're saying, that right now we've got a situation where British values has been slipped into what an outstanding school can be measured by. You know what I mean? And it kind of occurred just like that. It's like one little line at the bottom of what an outstanding school can be measured by. So I do wonder whether there is in fact, could that be done with the arts to actually say, yes, let's...
Yeah, it's integral to a vision of what outstanding is. This idea of two-tier school systems as well, and double sort of deliveries, superior and inferior ones, will recur in later questions. So I want to move on a little. How are local government cuts to cultural programmes affecting young people's engagement with the arts? We've already implied a little bit of this, but how are government cuts? Of course, you don't want to say anything about this. No, what cuts? There are other cuts.
Well, I think, just to take the art school again, we actually have two Arts Council projects which we run from Birmingham School of Art, East Side Projects and New Art West Midlands, and we've just had a grant for the second one. It is smaller, so there's less amount of money available than there was when the original scheme was introduced. I think we're forced to be more creative about how we actually deal with funding issues, but it allows for opportunities, so you can branch out in other ways and try to discover other ways of funding and developing
Such a
projects.
lovely, positive response.
Well,
I do agree.
Since 2012, and I looked at this before I came to this discussion.
Sure.
The Arts Council in Birmingham has invested £62 million in activity for children and young people. And yet, Birmingham is still one of the least engaged places in the country for arts and culture. So we are actually putting, for the Arts Council, is putting a lot of money in, particularly to Birmingham. So my challenge back is, in terms of the Arts Council investment, how do we make that work better and make it more joined up? But what I'd say is local authorities are under massive pressure.
Yes.
Well, I think I should bring in Steve at this point.
And that's very difficult for us to step in, though, and fill that gap.
Of course. And
we have
as you
to have
mentioned, you're
conversations around it.
still spending, there's still that provision.
It's about building partnerships, though, lots of different, diverse kinds of partnerships. I think that's one of the
these are
things that we have to
responses,
do. Yeah.
invariably, to a situation that's happened, but I still want to hear what's been the impact of local government cuts.
we're in Birmingham, we're in the largest local authority in Western Europe, the local authority that's been struggling on a variety of different issues, and unsurprisingly, like other authorities across the country, funding for the arts has been cut, and this local authority in Birmingham is talking seriously about considering going to zero in terms of arts funding in the city by 2018.
Wow.
That's got huge implications, but also have the implications for other cuts across the city, for the closure of community libraries, for the virtual non-existence of the youth service. We need to work with a healthy youth service in order to engage with young people across the whole city. And as we've seen in this city, for the youth services to be decimated, that's got a huge negative impact on the arts, the way in which we're able to offer arts and participation to young people.
And I think so often the onus, not to say that it's not good that these things are recovering and filling in the gaps where they are, but the onus is on them to make up the difference, as opposed to pressurise those of authority to continue to fund the arts because it's important.
And I think sustainability, I mean, picking up on the previous question, you raised about sustainability and starting something that people can continue and maintain and build an energy for, and the resilience to continue their artistic journey. Yeah. That sustainability is something, again, not just on an individual basis, is something that we're facing, because we get great programmes from the Arts Council, we get potential partnerships and collaborations with the universities, with our youth services, with children's centres, all of which are being squeezed. But we need to advocate more to funders to change the way that they are offering funding programmes, because they're quite often very short term, and whilst they provide a great intervention, a great potential for those people engaged in that programme, they stop. But it doesn't mean that those young people want to stop that engagement and stop that journey for themselves. We have to be creative again to find another journey, but again the pressure is on to find more people. So it's about quality and quantity, so it's that sort of depth and breadth. We need to find a way to make sure that sustainability through funding is there, and I would really hope that funders would find a more creative pathway for people to continue to pursue.
Cuts mean people have to change jobs. So arts practitioners, program leaders, you'll find them moving between organizations. What that then does is that for that practitioner who's already established a relationship with 30, 40 young people in that area, if they move boroughs, some young people can't follow them. So just by funding cuts, we can actually stop a very young person's arts journey. It limits careers advice, which then affects universities being able to recruit young people.
And it puts an onus back on things that aren't subsidised. So art that would be happening otherwise. I think I'm a little cynical here as well. There's already urban culture, so another company can just go bus in and get a great photo up and move on without things that take relationships as you're requiring, take rehearsals, take bringing them to subsidised forms of art to see that.
No, it was just a gentle challenge to say, because obviously I'm mindful of being from a funding and development agency, and I think, you know, you can put the onus back to funders, but I actually would gently challenge that and go, we have invested a huge amount, and local authorities historically have been a bigger funder of arts and culture than the Arts Council, and I think that's where the challenge is coming, because as local authorities get cut, the danger is that the arts and outreach, but we're not there to fill that shortfall. We will work with willing partners and we'll work with local authorities to say, how can we work with you to make this work? But I think it's a dangerous road for the Arts Council to go down to say, we'll step in and fill all the local authority gaps. We can't do it. What we need to do is make the money we've got work better and empower young people to take more control, because young people are they're engaging in the world in different ways to how we all did it. They're making their own work. We all together need to find creative ways of supporting those young people, but also to do it for themselves.
I think there's a big picture here. In the 1990s, this city was regenerated through the arts and culture, led by the City Council. It's not like that anymore. We as an arts and cultural sector need to take some leadership, and we need to be proactive. Absolutely. We need to recognise that the City Council is not going to solve our problems for us.
Yeah.
This is something that we've got to address ourselves, and that gives us the opportunity to take the lead and take hold of that agenda ourselves.
Sorry,
We've really got to move on, I'm sorry, but hopefully you can crowbar it into another response. Aside from local government cuts, why are we seeing falls in the uptake of art subjects at secondary level? How might this affect Birmingham arts and cultural communities in the long term, and what solutions could you offer? First of all, is it something you agree with, that we are seeing?
We're seeing significant cuts. In the last 3 years, 23% of drama teachers have been made redundant. The introduction of the EBAC, the English Baccalaureate, and Progress 8, two measures by which schools are league tables are judged, has had a massive impact on the arts in schools, and that head teachers and senior leadership teams are designing their timetables around the EBAC. That's got a knock-on effect to university. If young people don't study art or drama or music at school, they're much likely to select to study it at university. But it's also got an impact on the creative industries. We at the Birmingham Repertory Theatre face a skill shortage in various roles within the theatre, because if people aren't exposed to those subjects, A, they're not going to consider them for a future career, but B, and more importantly, they're not going to have those transferable skills we spoke about earlier at their fingertips as lifelong skills.
I'd also definitely support that. The priority is, how does a school get paid? And a school gets measured relative to mainstream grades. So your maths, English, science, those are high profile and what they get measured on and where the biggest competition is. And I think that I don't feel it's deliberate that the arts are then suffering, but I do feel that it is very much time to wake up to the fact that maybe more noise needs to be made. From a parent voice perspective, parents want their children to engage in the arts and all the things that will make them fully rounded. There are some parents that feel...
Is there still a residual, because the question is still saying, besides the cuts, besides these economic constraints, why is there a drop-off? And the case was starting to be made that music isn't just a DOS subject. Art isn't just where you go when you don't want to do maths. Are we going back to this, are we reverting to this idea, perhaps in the schools and delivery of art, that this is an easy option?
What I was just going to say is that the cuts are happening not just in arts funding, but the cuts are happening to our education anyway, where the young people would have been good enough to then enjoy another arts provision elsewhere. So even in a feeder kind of system, we're finding that, well, you're cutting at the beginning of the river, through the river, and then at the end of the river, you know, again, if you dare to be self-employed, you know, that's a pressure. There's all sorts of pressures there.
Constraints.
I think you've raised a really important point about the attitude of parents towards the arts, because we're in danger of having a two-tier system in terms, well, there is a two-tier system around independent schools where the arts are thriving, largely because school leadership and parents fully recognise the importance of the arts and culture to their children's education, and state schools where there's sometimes less parental support and less parental ambition in terms of supporting their children to achieve in the arts and culture.
And also seeing themselves reflected in the programmes. And I remember coming here when I went to prep school, private school, to see Symphony Hall, great things like that. And my friends, you know, lived in Handsworth, not going on school trips to the Rep or Town Hall Symphony Hall. And you're right, there's differences of artistic provision.
I think you're completely right about parents as well, because we need to help create the demand for that from parents, and I think it's a kind of virtuous circle that if you get parents demanding that, you get the baccalaureate inevitably places pressures. That needs to be addressed. The Ofsted stuff we talked about earlier, I think, needs to be addressed. So if we can get all those sort of in place, I think it will really help us. And I think also, I think the point about kind of social class is that the evidence all suggests that it's children from lower social economic groups who are suffering the most from the current situation, where they're the people who are really losing out. And the tragedy of that is that you're just losing a massive amount of talent that could be available to this country that, you know, we're not going to find.
People. It's over 92% of the population go to state school.
It's a symbiotic thing as well. Venues are going to have to adjust, the funders are going to have to adjust, and the parents and the culture more widely is going to
And you're seeing the knock-on already with, you know, you had all the stuff around the Oscars and the majority of people coming from independent schools and so on, and that we need to kind of really get to grips with that.
We do. What do you think the effect on young people's relationship with the arts would be of a move to the academy schooling model in Birmingham? or I guess the compulsory moving to the academy schooling model in Birmingham this autumn?
I don't think it is compulsory anymore.
They've reneged, but that was just some wealthier countryside schools, right? So I think for the underachieving schools that are not underperforming,
schools that are good or outstanding, I think, or
can stay within local authority.
Now, how many of those
big
are
institutions.
in
I
City
don't know
Birmingham?
the figures, how many of those are. But what I would say, it depends on the academy. I'm aware of some not far from here, very good academy schools that are really arts focused, that have a fantastic offer.
I'm very cynical. I have to throw some other information out there.
Yeah, I mean, there are other issues around academy schools that might be in. But to be fair, I am aware of some academy schools whose entire focus is arts and culture.
I am as well, and aware of the outstanding results. And I've done a week recently in East London with 5 different academies, and it was brilliant. However, I was also made aware of some things that you might not be. That one, they have a 5-to-1 exclusion rate compared with other schools. That means 5 times as many kids are kicked out, so they don't sit the exams. That might be why the results are so different. Their pay scales are very, very different. There are heads on, in some instances, £250,000 in deprived areas. How is this something that's going to assist equality of provision?
I think a point that was made earlier is that to a certain extent, from academy to academy, the values are very different. The management structures are different, and therefore what they place value on will always change. And also the areas that they serve are different. So that means that you could get 2 schools in the same neighborhood, and one could have 8 art teachers and another one feels like they need to have just 3. So we kind of have to also remember that the people that are in charge have to share our vision, and that will be reflected in their school. So I think that's one of the big pressures, that with the academy, they're no longer answerable to local authorities. So we now have to hope that they really do have the best interest of everyone at heart.
But you flag up the crucial thing of accountability, and if no one is holding them to task, then who's to say that the provision just doesn't slip? And
this is why it's important, in my opinion anyway, that we empower parents and communities, because they're the last people that can really do anything about, they're the last people that can do anything about all of this.
And that could be a real way forward for arts organisations, would be to volunteer their staff to go and join governing bodies to help support that and make the case at the governor's level for
That's a
for
strong
arts.
idea. I like that.
You know, I think that's a really potential way forward, and I think worth the time for people.
I feel that, like austerity, academisation is here to stay. There's cross-party support for it. We're not going to go back to the good old days of local education authorities across the country, and we are in a much more fragmented system, which makes it more difficult for artists and arts organisations to engage en masse with schools and communities. But there are opportunities with academies, and as Rebecca said, a number of academies have placed the arts at the centre of what they're doing. I'm a director of the Core Education Trust, which oversees 2 previous Trojan Horse schools. One of those schools, Nansen Primary School in Alum Rock, has been transformed through using the arts, and it's gone from requires improvement a year ago to last month Ofsted designating that school as good and praising the arts work that's happening in that school. So academies can be good if they're well led and if they're engaged with their communities.
I'll just flag up another potential risk. As somebody who's gone into schools and seen it, and very concerned about this 5-to-1 exclusion rate, PRUs are expanding. I'm going into PRU, and that's so you're just moving the problem out somewhere else, not actually increasing and improving provision more broadly, but sort of outsourcing the problem, and prison's going to deal with it. We're going to have to be dealing with interventions much later, sadly, unless that. Just something else I'd throw out
risk
there.
of moving this from education, I would agree. I would say that effectively what you are saying is something that we do find that in terms of arts appreciation, I would actually argue that alternative provisions, as PRUs are now known, probably commission more than they used to, because they're finding that for the hardest to reach young people, creativity seems to be something that they can engage with the most, and alternative provisions recognize that. And perhaps there's something to be said that, going back to mainstream, saying, oh, did you know that you could actually have helped keep that person in school longer just by changing their timetable a little bit better? But again,
I think if we don't solve these core things of accountability, of communication pathways, then a lot of people are going to slip through the cracks, and we won't even know about them.
Which goes back to the whole parents,
congratulating.
the whole parents thing. So so in a way, if you're talking about education, we should start with early years and parents, and like, so we fund stuff like the Family Arts Festival. You know, it's like, how do you engage the families as a whole who can't engage? It's something they can do together, that they can sort of have build the confidence in seeing the value of
It's
art
creating
and
a place
culture.
of trust for people to come to. We work out in the Ladywood community very strongly. We go out and work with community centres and children's centres there, and we have events on site in our foyers to bring people back to that are free events, so that you start to build that relationship and enable people to feel, oh, that's not a place where actually, well, it might be, and then we enable the support workers and the children's centres to bring them in, and then they know that they're coming with someone they trust, and it becomes a place that they can come to. But keeping that provision free, keeping that provision there is a key challenge, but it's absolutely vital, and it's part of that commitment to being part of our neighbourhood.
Well, you're kind of preempting my next question, which is useful as time is slipping away. What steps should we take to ensure that our young people can turn a love for arts into a long-term career? What steps can we?
It's not just a career.
No,
it's a life engagement with the arts in whichever way they choose. It's a fundamental human right. Everybody should be enabled to engage with culture in the way they choose
the perceptive thing
at the time they want to.
What you just said as well is, we kind of presuppose that a career in the arts means the guy singing on stage or the one painting the picture. Well, actually, what about the managers? What about the audience members, the people that appreciate this art? As you said, it's a lifelong provision, lifelong appreciation of art.
I think it's a drive towards professionalisation is what the buzzword for it in universities is. Skills that can become jobs, and they're not ancillary, they're part of the whole way in which you produce culture, basically. So there's lots of different roles and lots of different activities. But I think one of the key challenges for the university, Birmingham School of Art, is to actually become more inclusive in terms of the curriculum, because it's partly about recognising what other people think of as culture and art, which might not be reflected at the moment in the way that the university organises its art school. On the one hand, it's about identity and people being able to see themselves somehow reflected in what the curriculum might be in a university, but also then being challenged about that as well. It's trying to get both those things going at the same time, which is quite hard, but that's the big challenge.
Art needs to be relevant and authentic and engaging for young people. So, if it's not, they won't see themselves reflected in it and it won't be meaningful to them. So I think the art has to be really good, but also I think we have to offer really clear progression routes for young people who do want to consider it as a career. It might be opportunities to shadow, it might be mentoring opportunities, all those things are really important. But I completely agree with what you said, is that it's just the love of the arts. It's enjoyable, it's fun, it enriches life. I can't imagine a world without music and literature and all those things.
There's definitely been a sea change over the past 10, 15 years. I see it in particularly jazz courses, music courses. The awareness that now we're going to need to teach you how to market yourself once you've graduated. There was a conveyor belt of qualified great musicians, great painters, but without any knowledge of what a funding application looks like or how you go about building a buzz or creating a name for yourself. And I think there are some incursions of the marketplace that are unwelcome, but this one is a very important one, given that we're not sure about what the funding landscape is going to look like for new graduates. People to have an understanding of the whole art psychology and where they fit within it.
I would say that, following on from what you were saying from a university perspective and otherwise, that, one of the clients that we represent is called Blastbeat Education. And the idea is young people put on their own Battle of the Bands event, start with no money, and we show them how to grow money. So for us, the idea is that you're having fun, but we're also getting you future ready. So I do feel like, number one, the solution is how do we incorporate other skills, enterprise skills and such into that. I feel that we do need to support parents to be brave enough to allow their children to take part in things. Even the situation with the drum right now, where, if the drum goes, again, it's very interesting that the people that speak to us would never know how to get heard. They could not put a campaign together without having to, ask somebody else. Whereas in another community, we've seen people protest for keeping toilets open. You know what I mean? So I do feel that one of the things we do have to do is maybe start to look at how do we equip communities to effectively make enough noise about the things they really care about. And then we also need our leadership to listen because that's another part where you can shout all you want, but there's still a handful of people that we need to care as best as possible. And I also think another thing is to appreciate that digital skills and the things that young people engage with is changing. If they love Vines, let's go find out why and let's go bring it back in. If they want to do X, Y, and Z on YouTube, Instagram, let's make Instagram a part of whatever arts provision.
Absolutely.
Let's show you how to blog better. Little things like that.
Yeah.
I think that's how we protect the future.
Sadly, we've only got time for one more question and swift answers, but what meaningful actions will you undertake in the coming year to encourage young people to engage with and pursue careers in the arts? Stuff that you're perhaps already planning to do, or as a result of this question, you've just decided that you're going to do.
Big push in Birmingham School of Art is to reach many more schools in Birmingham. In the past, we seem to have only had contact with 2 out of about 8 of the networks of schools in the city. So I think we need to go out and have a presence in those schools on a continuing basis. We have a good exhibition every summer for sixth form children to come and exhibit in the art school as well, and that's how they get to know about the environment, think about the possibility of going to the art school. So we need to do more of those kinds of events and get everyone engaged on a continuing basis, sustainable basis.
We would work with university graduates more. We'd love to, in fact, from working with the interns, it's been very, very clear that we need to support more young people come in, get work experience, see how we do things. We take them along to meetings, they sit, they watch, they learn how to talk to counsellors and things like that. And we really need to work harder trying to understand what problems you need solving as well. Because the schools have said we need X, Y, and Z, and we need to then listen to yourselves and say, okay, you know what I mean? So I think for us as the middle person, we've got to work harder to, number one, bring talent through, but also understand who's providing what and communicate better.
I'm going to continue to champion the notion that what we need in Birmingham is a virtual arts school in which just has 2 members of staff, a head teacher and administrator, but the staff of the virtual arts school will be the staff of Birmingham's arts organisations. So Town Hall Symphony Hall may well be the music department, the Rep may well be the drama department, and that would enable us, with a well-respected head teacher, to advocate for the arts across the city, to make sure that every school was getting arts and culture provision, and that spare capacity in our venues was being addressed. Here at Symphony Hall, there are empty seats. Over at the Birmingham Repertory Theatre, we have empty seats. That capacity could be given to schools. There's all sorts of ways in which we operate strategically together, we can achieve a lot more for the benefit of children, young people and adults in the city.
Strategy, definitely. So we want to make sure that we're reaching out in a really productive way to maximise the funding that we can get in, to continue engaging with the people that we are doing and to add to that. So it's all about, for us, it's all about reaching out and encouraging in.
And for us, I think at the Arts Council, I think the focus for the next year will be really looking at the cultural education partnerships that have come out of the Cultural Education Challenge, which are about how do we make a joined up provision on the ground with all the organisations that we fund to make sure that we reach beyond that core of schools who are currently taking up an offer and really make sure that what the fantastic stuff that is out there reaches all children and young people, not just the ones who are lucky enough to have a head start in life and and so that it is kind of much more equal.
I'll chip in quickly before. I'm doing a flyover show this year which involves lots of young people also working with Music for Youth and their festival, and that's a good example. It just flashed in my head of a festival that's got great intentions for young people across the country and here in Birmingham, but struggles to connect with people that are here. It seems that the consciousness of that festival and the minds of other arts providers in the city are sometimes disconnected, so that's something I'll be wanting to do, much like you as well, Kit, kind of be the bridge builder. But this has been a wonderful conversation, an interesting and stimulating one. I hope we managed to get it all in there into the little space that we had, little time that we had.
Brilliant.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Super.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Thank you. On to the next panel we go. I hope you're not too late for your next meetings and stuff.
No, that's great. Thanks.
Good.
Do you know about our Jazz Lines programme of work?
Say again?
Do you know about our Jazz Lines
Yeah,
programme
of
of work?
course. I mean,
have you done work with it?
I've known Tony since I was 18.
Yeah.
So I did commuter jazz
Yeah.
many times.